Hey guys, how's everyone doing? Welcome back to Harry's Highlights. On this video, we're going to talk about the book Ego is the Enemy. This is by Ryan Holiday. Now this is about understanding that the threat is the unchecked ego to your success. It's about understanding that just how detrimental ego can be to you reaching your full potential, to you reaching all the things that you deserve and want in life. See, what I liked about this book is about understanding a lot of the philosophies in it was all to do with the ego can be very powerful, but also extremely destructive. And it's about understanding this fine line of basically keeping your ego in check, about how to handle it. Think of it like having a wild lion, extremely powerful, if used in the correct ways and in the correct areas, if you're using it as a tool, but also extremely hard to tame, to keep, it's very fickle, to keep it all doing the things you want it to do and not deciding on what it wants to happen. And that's what we're talking about. That's basically the explanation of ego and how frustratingly difficult it can be to work with and not against. See, one of the parts the philosophies I wanted to talk about there is understanding the unhealthy belief in our own importance. That's what ego is really about. It's about having this self-inflated belief that it's because of this, I am entitled to all of this one. And how damaging that can be, and how very fickle and difficult it can be to control. It's one of the things to do with ego that I talked about there is understanding how it can basically turns certain positives into extreme negatives. For example, one is how it turns the concern with self-image. Attention to detail and being well presented and well received in the public and and around your friend groups and in society. Well, it turns that into obsession. How it becomes, not a hair is out of place. You never trip. You only ever see your highlight reel. That no one can ever see you on a bad day. That it's impossible to see you without makeup. To see only ever the best of the best. Not even, good is never enough. It always has to be the great. It becomes an obsession, and how what you project to the world always has to be 100% or nothing, which isn't real. That's not true. But ego will force you to never ever be compared to, your worst day would still be better than anyone else's best day. That's that version of unhealthy obsession with self-importance and self-image. The second one there is about how it turns confidence into arrogance. So there's a large difference between self-belief and feeling that I'm quite capable to I'm better than everybody. You're all beneath me. I am the best because of this. Instead of that humility of confidence, where it's all about understanding that I've got this way because I've trained hard and I'm good and I'm willing to teach others and show others how to do this one is. Anyone who wants to learn, I'm willing to share. But if a time came and a situation called for it, I would be quite capable to hold my own, or whatever it may be. An admirable amount of confidence where it's wow, that guy really knows, or that person really knows what they're doing or how to handle themselves, or they feel comfortable in their own skin. Arrogance, what ego turns confidence into, is where it becomes everyone is just a peasant in comparison to you, that they're not on your level, and that it is what's it called? It's beneath you to basically mingle with anybody, or to speak is too much effort for you. It's everything is just you're entitled and above anything and everyone. That's what ego does. Then it talks about how ego will sabotage long-term goals, because what it does, it caps your potential. Because you get to a certain stage, you develop an ego, and then all of a sudden you get too big for the little things. All the things that got you there are now beneath you. All the work and the sacrifices and choices you made in difficult times that got you here, you stop making, because now you've made it. Now you believe that you're entitled and you can rest because you deserve it. You should be rewarded for your hard work and all the effort you've put in. And what that does is, unfortunately, that you're then capped. Because you stop choosing to grow, you stop growing. Because you're no longer putting in the effort to improve and get better. If in nature nothing is stagnant, everything is either growing or dying, the second that you decide to stop, is the second you start dying. And that's how it sabotages your long-term goals, because you don't start reaching them because you stopped. Ego has got in the way and made you feel comfortable to just sit back and relax. The other thing it does is that it stops us from achieving mastery in whatever our craft is. Because instead of you get to a point where you feel good enough, and if you allow ego to overtake you in that situation, you then feel like, well, what's the difference between here and there? That, besides extra work, extra effort, is it really worth it? You stop yourself from achieving mastery. Truly understanding your craft and improving it, because the ego got in the way and helped lull you into this trap or this belief that it's like anything extra, all you'd be doing would be putting in more work, more effort, more time, more energy for basically the same result. And that's the problem or the issue with ego. And then another area that is parts of the areas where it sort of creeps in is during the aspiring stage. When you're aspiring to achieve something, when ego creeps in, you then start to fear everyone's judgment and what people think of you. You then get so caught up in always trying to put your best foot forward that on days when there are days where you're not everything's going to work out for you, you're so concerned with your image and you're obsessed with it and like, what do people think and how they're going to interpret this one. It's not like minding your own words or minding like the person you're projecting. It becomes overly meticulous, designed version of yourself that you're only projecting this picture perfect person at all times, whether it be 2 a.m. in the morning or whether it be 9 o'clock at 9 o'clock at night, that you're just constantly always perfect. That's what happens with ego. It becomes you never give yourself the chance to relax. You never give yourself the chance to be like, hey, it's okay. We all have bad days and that happens. No, when ego creeps in during the aspiring stage, you can become so caught up with the image you're projecting, you then start sacrificing all the other areas of work that you needed to get you to the next stage. And whatever it is you might wanted to have achieved. The second stage where it creeps in, or potentially creeps in, is during the succeeding stage. When you become overconfident in what you've achieved, instead of building on what you've achieved, you then start to rest on your laurels, as they say. You basically feel like you've arrived, and you feel that like, you know what, why do any more work? This is pretty good. And that ego creeps in, and then instead of building on that one and reaching your full potential, instead of reaching those levels that you aspired for, you get comfortable. You go, this is good enough. Is it really worth any extra effort when this is better than where I was? It's not where I want it to be, but I'll just stop here. Because ego creeps in, because ego just takes over and lulls you into that false sense of security that like, this is pretty good. And then all of a sudden, after a period of time, you start to realize everything starts to unravel because you weren't truly there, and you end up at the bottom. And the beginning of all of that again, to restart all of that, knowing that you'd swam halfway across the lake, only to allow yourself to drift back to the island where you first began, and to think that you'd have to do that whole thing, all that effort again, plus again, you do 1.5 times the work. It's almost crushing, and that feeling of defeat creeps in, and you decide to, basically fall into despair. The third place ego creeps into is during failure. This is where people start to pass blame. They start to become the victim, and they start to always protect the ego. It's too difficult or painful and uncomfortable to put your hand up and say, yeah, you know what? That's on me. I made that mistake. I made a mistake here, that was all on me, and I cop it all on the chin. There should be consequences, I should be reprimanded for what I did because I'm taking full ownership of what I did there. That painful uncomfortableness that your ego would experience, knowing that you're not as great as what you thought, you're not as polished as what you believed, you're not as untouchable as the painting you'd drawn for yourself, that hey, you did slip up, you did make a mistake. To admit that uncomfortable feeling that, that everything that you thought that you were isn't 100% true. That's where ego creeps in, and all of a sudden the blame game starts, and you start victimizing yourself, and that, yeah, well, if that person done their job properly, or if that didn't happen, or if, this situation was different, because you want to protect your ego. When that ego creeps in, it's extremely difficult to say things like, you know what, if I had done this different, if I hadn't have made that choice, if I hadn't have gone through with that decision over there, then this would have been different, and that's all on me. That amount of character, that amount of extreme personal understanding and realization that although you're not perfect, that's still perfectly acceptable. To make that sort of a realization is very difficult and almost impossible when ego creeps in. The other one there is understanding how that ego distracts you from the work. When the ego creeps in, you then start to neglect all the work that got you there. You start to neglect all the things that made you what you are now, because ego lulls you into this soft cushion of comfort where it's like, do you really need to do the work? You're living large, everything's pretty good now. It's that saying that when you become too big for the little things, you become too little for the big things. When you allow ego to creep in and lull you into that false sense of that you don't need to do the things that got you there anymore, is the moment that you'll start to realize that you're not ready for the big things, and you might not ever be. There's a great sort of solution to combating ego that the UFC fighter Frank Shamrock came up with, and it's the plus minus equals. That's about that. The plus represents someone that's better than you. It humbles you. Might be a mentor, might be a rival, might be a competitor. But either way, it's someone who's doing things better than what you are and keeps you humble, knowing that like as good as you are, there's someone doing something better. The second one is the minus. Now this is the idea of being able to teach someone the lessons that you've learned. Someone who's not as good as you. When you do that, you're forced to look at the things that you do objectively, distill them into a way, break them down into a simple form that this person can understand them, and you have to be able to explain it. Black and white. Here it is. Here's what I've done wrong, and here's why you shouldn't do it and how you can avoid it. But you have to check your ego, because you have to admit that I'm not as great as what I said. I'm not as well polished as what I believed. And the picture that I painted for myself isn't as picture perfect as what I thought. The third one is equal. You need an equal to be able to challenge you, to be able to bounce ideas off, to be able to measure yourself against where you're at. By keeping those three in your life, you'll be able to balance your ego and prevent ego from becoming your enemy. So to quickly summarize, ego is the enemy is understanding that the threat is of an unchecked ego is the biggest threat to your success. The biggest threat to your future potential is ego. Understanding that ego is basically an unhealthy belief in our own importance. Believing under or being under the belief that we are more important than what we truly are. It's about removing humility and, basically self-inflating our own personal view of ourselves. Ego will turn concern for self-image into obsession. It takes us from healthy sort of I'm well dressed, groomed, showered, looking good, to, oh my gosh, is this shirt going to be okay? Is this going to be alright? What does this person think? I don't know if I should be wearing this. Is this going to be offensive, or is this going to be? I don't know if somebody else is going to wear and say the same thing as me. Is it going to be better than mine? It becomes unhealthy. Ego turns confidence into arrogance. You start to see people as beneath you. So you start to see situations as beneath you. You start to see yourself as higher than what you are. You begin to overestimate and then start to think that, you can. You remove confidence, and it becomes more of as it says, arrogance. The understanding is that ego will sabotage long-term goals, because you then cap yourself indirectly, because you believe that good is good enough, and you don't have to achieve great, and that what the only difference between good and great is just more work. It's going to be the same result anyways, which isn't true. Then understanding that ego basically stops us from achieving mastery in whatever our craft is, because you then stop growing, you stop polishing yourself, you stop putting in the effort to become better, to become more, because your ego says you're good enough. The three parts that ego will creep into is during the aspiring stage, when you're starting to allow people's judgment and what they think of you to affect everything that you do, that it removes you from the focus on your work and what you are looking to achieve. It creeps in during the succeeding stage, when you become overconfident instead of building on all the effort and work that you put in already, you then start to think that it's, this is good, I should just rest here. You become entitled and believing that you don't need to put in any more effort. Then it comes in during the failure stage, when you start to victimize yourself and start to blame others, because it's easier to blame others and their wrongdoing than to put your hand up and own your own. Own the mistakes that you'd made and the reasons why that things went wrong was because of you. Because that bruises your ego, bashes it around too much. The other one was there is understanding how ego distracts you from the work. Ego comes in and takes you away from all the things that got you there, because it puts blinders or sunglasses over what you're seeing, and you don't see it for what it really is. You start to see things as like, this is pretty good. And to understand how to combat ego was using the plus, minus, and equals by Frank Shamrock. He explained that the plus is about finding someone that's better than you, a mentor or a competitor, a rival, understanding that no matter how good you are, there's someone better. The minus was about looking for someone who's lesser than you and giving them the chance to learn from you. By teaching them, you have to objectively look at the things that you do and be able to explain that to that person, why they shouldn't do it and the mistakes that you made and how you aren't perfect, but they can learn from you and how you're learning from yourself to become better. And then obviously the last one was an equals. This was to be able to compare yourself to others, to be able to give yourself the chance to compete, to be able to constantly drive yourself because they're on the same path or relatively at the same level as yours, so you have the chance to push and be able to constantly look at and evaluate your strengths and weaknesses and against theirs. And by using those three, it'll help you to combat ego and prevent ego from becoming the enemy. Now we're making a lot more of these videos for this training series to help you with your personal development goals. That's all for now though, so until next time, leave a comment below on what you like the most and look forward to sharing more with you in the next episode of Harry's Highlights.